Start off with a little news. Discarded facial coverings are killing wildlife. Trump is being investigated by 2 grand juries. Historic flooding grips Nashville. A mysterious disease is killing young bears in California, making them fearless. The ship is still stuck, whether by accident or strategic, in the Suez Canal. Looks like it will be for a while. Alien languages may not be entirely alien. Human contact more likely than we think. And I've no doubt the controllers are in contact with some race, just not in space. And top lifeguards earning up to $400,000. And Iran and China sign a 25-year cooperation agreement. And looking very awkward. And what about the biggie? Here we can see current stats, and this is throughout the realm, and actually it happens to be the same as the amount of people who die of hunger each year, and we see it going up as we speak. And why is this not a pandemic? Why does nobody give a damn? And this equally large number is not worth shutting down the world economy. I'm very sad, and I think the answer is they don't really care. And if they did, we would take a year off to eliminate this number as well. Welcome. Today I want to discuss where we come from. Here in many of these videos, we're trying to figure out what happened only 150 years ago. A scratch in our history and timeline. 150 years. Examining such a recent timeline into our true origins. Only peering into the last reset. It seems clear that these people, in the time period when photography is taking off, are not the people that created all the infrastructure of any value in this realm. At best, these people were wood builders, and I think we can attribute anything built out of wood to these people. We've discussed that the World's Fairs may have been indoctrination schools for a privileged class, and typically these World's Fairs were a snapshot of the false historical narrative that would be propagated for the next 150 years, introducing many foods and even human exhibits. And as we've examined, these exhibits were falsities, seeming to be people forced to portray a particular people, often taken from their homeland, for these World's Fair cultural indoctrinations. And aside from that, serving as a double whammy, giving an excuse for these glorious buildings found in these World's Fairs, serving their purpose in rewriting a narrative, including the construction of the very buildings they were held in, and then demolishing them. But again, this is just the last reset, a mere 100+ years ago, and some people say it's impossible that they could pull this off. How could we be inheritors of all the infrastructure of a past civilization? Some say, how could you fool the people 150 years ago? Surely they would have seen these buildings, written something down in their diary. And I think it's no different than today. Each generation is told the same thing, that these buildings were built 100 years before your arrival, and nobody questions anything. Similar to our present time. Most people are walking around not realizing what we realize in this small community. And if that's possible in this time period, it would be even more possible 100 to 150 years ago. No cell phones, no TV, oftentimes no leaving the small radius in which you reside for your entire life. Very easy to pull something like this off in that time period. And I think this same reset and repeat cycle could be propagated for 1,000 years. And we do see signs of buildings that appear to be 1,000 years old. And really, beyond 100 years, every story falls apart. Every piece of architecture, or massive wall, or megalithic block doesn't work, and they'll attribute some of these works to before the time of Christ, and they're equally as glorious as every foundational building of every modern nation. And so where do we really come from? If we can't trust the narrative, we have to look at every piece of literature that's not endorsed by the mainstream, such as the Bible, the Sumerian texts, the countless volumes from India that appear to be telling a more factual story than anything we get in school. And these stories almost appear to be somewhat of science fiction, and yet they also correlate all cultures speaking of a massive flood, great wars between good and evil, chariots of fire and vimanas that move through the skies. And this seems to be closer to our past, with all the evidence that we look at: melted buildings, impossible architecture, and the erasing of history, leading us to believe that we're some primitive people rising up from the mud to ape to the techno-slave nation that we are today, a disposable society. And so where did we come from? And what do these old texts say? So let's just start with our Bible, since most people will be familiar. Nothing shocking. And what does the Bible tell us? That before us there were giants. Very clear. This is an old text. It has survived. And we don't get that with our mainstream narrative. Again, beginning with mud, ape, caveman, and us, the disposable man, the man of mortgage, long work hours, and no clue where we came from. But again, back to the Bible, we're told of giants. And not much, that these giants were the byproduct of a race or species or angels or whatever that had bred with some earthly creatures, and the result was these giants, a whole race, and they were bad, and they were wiped out without any remorse by the good Lord to make room for us. And now again, this story is completely in contradiction with the mainstream narrative. There is no place for a giant. However, there is a place for a dinosaur, giant lizard. And this little tidbit was left behind for us to ponder. Religion, standing in opposition to science and geology. And why don't they want us to know about this large entity? Could it be that this is the truth? That this is where we came from? When we look around at everything of the old world, it's massive. And we are tiny creatures, perfectly suited for a small manufactured home. And everything from the past is massive. Structures that appear to have been built by giants. And this is where we have a contradiction with the Bible. In the Bible, these were a savage race that needed to be wiped out by the Creator. And yet when we look with our eyes, what it seems like is these giants were anything but savages. And wouldn't it be part of the truth left, but yet completely inverted? And this brings me to this wondrous place, the castle in Prague. So what do they say about this Prague castle? A very short entry, actually, for such a glorious work. It's a complex in Prague, Czech Republic, built in the 9th century. It is the official office of the President of the Czech Republic. The castle was the seat of power for kings of Bohemia, Holy Roman emperors, and presidents of Czechoslovakia. The Bohemian crown jewels are kept within a room, hidden inside. And according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the Prague Castle is the largest ancient castle in the world, occupying 750,000 square feet. It attracts 1.8 million visitors annually. So the history of the castle began in 870, when it was first said to have built the Church of the Virgin Mary. Later, the Basilica of St. George was built, and the Basilica of St. Vitus, founded under the reign of Vratislaus I. He was a Duke of Bohemia. And then another king improves the fortifications, and in the 14th century, Charles IV rebuilds the palace in the Gothic style, a little renovation by good Charles Hare, and they begin a Gothic church building that would take almost 6 centuries to complete. And they have some wars, nobody occupies the castle for a while, clearly a reset, and in 1485, some king begins to rebuild the castle. This guy, a king of Bohemia, for about 25 plus years. And again, this thing doesn't look like it would ever need to be rebuilt. And yet we see a repurposing after repurposing by these silly characters in an early time period, lucky to have a horse and buggy, and our narrative wants to tell us that they were pumping out things like this. Small population, feeble, short-lived. A large fire in 1541 destroys large parts of the castle. New portions are added. These people are unperplexed by these tragedies, seeming to have a blank check. And finally in 1618, we have the Bohemian Revolt. 1648, the Battle of Prague. And in 1848, this guy makes the Prague castle his home, clearly a controller, inheritor of the time. And then we take a big jump to 1918, our timeline. And renovation is still going on until 1936. In 1939, the Nazis forced the president to hand the nation over to the Germans. And good old Walt spent a night in the Prague castle, proudly surveying his new possession. And after the liberation of Czechoslovakia and the coup in 1948, the castle housed the office of Communist Czechoslovakian government. And there we go again. Our timeline, as I've mentioned, communism, a perfect tool to establish a new nation. And perhaps before America became the supposed free world that it is today, in the last reset it was simply a communist nation. And many of these old photos that we see are from that era, but still not the builders, just as clueless as our modern civilization. And so that's what they say. Very unimpressive story for one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. A very underrated country, and clearly this city was built and occupied by a much greater people. And that brings us back to our point. Where do we come from? And who are the people before us? So that's what they say. And it would be fine if we were blind, and even better for them if we were stupid. But what do we see when we look at this wondrous place? Does this seem like a place that was built and destroyed over and over by tiny, warring people? Or does it look like a place that was built by a people who absolutely had their shit together? A people way beyond what we are and what we are moving towards. And again, the place is absolutely massive. And this is our smoking gun to what kind of people built this castle, and in what kind of time period, and what other clues lend to these people. And that would be these doors. The doors in Prague are absolutely massive. And so we have giant buildings built with giant stone. We have giant doors, and not just a big door. Maybe a big door would be the height of 2 people. But a door like this, carved with intricate carvings, and if you've ever hung a door before, you'll appreciate this door. And not just who built the door, but whoever was responsible for hanging this door. that probably weighs a few tons at least, and again constructed around 800 AD. So as far as I'm concerned, we can just throw the timeline out the window, and we could just focus on what we're seeing here. Massive buildings, massive doors, and finally, massive books. And this Prague Castle is said to house one of the largest libraries of these oversized books. And these books are not just some novelty. Again, there's a library of these old and tattered books that appear to have been read by the hands of giants. And I think that's all we can conclude. We look at a lot of these buildings having every similar feature to this Prague Castle found in every nation throughout this realm. The difference is, what we see in this castle are all the remaining parts pointing to this conclusion. Because this nation was late to have the sanitizers of history move in, we have a lot of this evidence left over. Giant everything, giant musical instruments, books, crowns, guns, swords. And I guess what I'm saying is, if this castle was built by giants, then I think it's very possible that everything in this realm may have been built by giants. And this may actually be where we come from. So I think that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And in conclusion, as a little bonus, I thought I'd just have a little look and see if there were any catacombs under the Prague Castle, and sure enough there are. And uncertain, many theories floating around, but what is clear is that many of these wondrous structures in all cities seem to have these bone-filled catacombs. And what is the meaning? At the very least, it shows that we do have a place in history, not as the builders of these wonders, but rather having some other kind of purpose.